Well, the Justice Department is now bracing for a nationwide go slow by magistrates today. Court processes may come to a standstill. That's if the country's 19,000 magistrates have their way and postpone all cases before them. They're demanding pay increases in line with judges. The state has offered a fine. For more on this, we're joined in studio by Project Director of the International Crisis Group in Southern Africa, Piers Pigou. A very good morning to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, SADC largely coming out saying they welcome the process through which the referendum has been conducted. They're happy with everything despite a few incidents of violence. What do you have to say?
Well, you know, like everything with Zimbabwe, there are multiple perspectives on what has happened. There are some positives in terms of the way that the vote has been carried out, and certainly it's been relatively peaceful. There have been some anomalies, there have been some problems. But I think one needs to have a much wider angle lens look at this whole referendum process dating back to 2009 when the constitution making process took place, and it has been fraught with problems. And I think one of the biggest problems leading into the referendum is that the vast majority of Zimbabweans didn't know what they were voting about, and so essentially most have voted blind. And this is highly problematic for the credibility of the process.
Well, this new draft constitution has been years in the making, as you said. Many people coming out and saying the more things change, the more they stay the same. And there isn't much to write home about in this new constitutional reform. What do you have to say about this? Do you think it will ensure future stability?
Look, a set of rules and a new rule book doesn't ensure anything. There was nothing in the last rule book that gave a permission for the kind of abuses that took place during 2008, for example. So the real test of this constitution and the development of new institutions and the strengthening of existing institutions to fulfill the mandate of this constitution is going to be the real test. And that's where there are huge problems, and there is huge skepticism as to whether this is really going to change conditions.
Let's talk about a few of the sticking points when it comes to this new draft constitution. Many people saying it gives the president too much power, one or two hiccups here and there with regards to the policies that it's outlined. Are you happy with everything the constitution has to offer?
Well, look, it can be seen as a step forward in some respects. Some of the remarkable executive powers of the presidents have been whittled back, but there is still what some critics are calling an imperial presidency very much in place. There's a new Bill of Rights, which to all intents and purposes is a very significant step forward. There are some serious deficits in that bill. There's the beginning of decentralization processes in Zimbabwe, which I think is an important step in terms of rolling back the centralized power there. But there is a long, long way to go. And in fact, many people see this as no more than an interim step.
Well, the gay and lesbian rights issue still a bit of a sticking point when it comes to this constitution.
Well, certainly that's been a bugbear of President Mugabe, and it was always going to be an issue there. And I think the MDC formations decided to compromise on this. It wasn't worth going into battle on this, and I think it may be something that gets addressed further down the line.
Well, in the build-up to the elections that are due to take place later this year, what do you think? Where are we as far as the political landscape is concerned? We know Robert Mugabe shows no signs of abating. He continues to pursue the presidency. While Morgan Tsvangirai, we've seen a different picture of him. We've seen him a little bit more stately this time as he's taken position of power. But what's the balance of play at the moment when it comes to the build-up to the election?
Well, you know, the power configuration in Zimbabwe since the government of national unity was put in place has always been skewed in favour of ZANU-PF. They have retained hard power within the country. That doesn't mean that the MDC and the larger faction in particular have not had influence and power as well. The question really needs to be asked as to have they used that wisely. Now, as we lead towards an election and the relationship between these parties has been fraught throughout the process and increasingly fraught, as we move towards the election, both parties or major parties are going to be pushing very hard for a winner-takes-all solution to this. It seems unlikely, however, that we are going to see a particular winner who will take the power of government in totality following the elections. And I think many people are expecting some kind of new government of national unity. The question is really going to be is what kind of configuration of power will there be, and how will that power sharing arrangement be configured?
It's very interesting that you touch on that, because the new constitution doesn't have a place for a prime minister. So how will that power sharing agreement play out? We don't know at the moment.
Well, much would depend on what the results of an election would be in terms of the respective powers of the parties themselves and what kind of negotiating position they're in. So, what that looks like is very unclear. But I think in terms of the broad brushstrokes, there is an understanding that there will have to be some form of accommodation following an election.
In all likelihood, the referendum will go through with not much contestation. We know that 50% counting has gone through. Where to now, do you think, for Zimbabweans, once this is done, they've adopted the constitution? What processes do they have to put in place to make sure that they have peaceful and credible elections?
Well, there has to be a reconciliation between the new constitutional imperatives and the existing Zimbabwean laws, particularly as they relate to election-related issues. The other areas of concern relate to other election reform issues that have been outstanding since the middle of 2011, when a draft election roadmap was put in place. And those relate to issues around the partisanship of the security services. And again, these latest arrests again raise the profile of this particular concern, which hasn't been properly dealt with. And then I think it's really about the strengthening of democracy-supporting institutions, particularly the Zimbabwean Human Rights Commission, which has a very particular role in terms of elections and dealing with concerns around election violence and intimidation.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. That was Project Director of the International Crisis Group in Southern Africa, Piers Pigou.